I am 88 years old, and if there is something I learned too late, it's that not every new beginning is progress. Sometimes what feels like a second chance is just a quieter way of losing what you spent a lifetime building. It took me decades to understand that, because when you reach a certain age, you're no longer trying to avoid being alone. You're just looking for peace. My name is Elizabeth Davis, and at 67, I made a decision that seemed simple, almost inevitable. I got married again, believing I was choosing companionship, security, and peace for the years I still had left. I truly thought I was doing the right thing, that I was finally choosing for myself. But what no one explained to me is that some decisions don't just take away your future. They erase what you've already built. And when I realized that there was no way to go back, it wasn't on the wedding day that I realized the mistake. That day, everything felt light, simple, almost as if life was giving me another chance to do things differently. The ceremony was small, just a few close friends, and I remember thinking that I finally wouldn't be alone anymore. I truly believed I was stepping into a calmer phase of my life. The shock didn't come from a fight or a problem at home. It came months later, in a silent, impersonal place, sitting on a hard chair, across from a woman behind a counter. The office was cold, filled with papers and numbers, and I was there just to handle something I thought was routine, something simple, something I had done before. That's when she looked at me, typed in some information, and paused in a way I will never forget. She asked if I had reported my new marital status. I said yes, casually, without imagining the weight of that answer. And then she explained, with a calmness that felt almost indifferent, that the conditions of my retirement had changed completely. At first, I didn't understand. I thought it was a mistake, some technical detail that could be fixed with more documents. But the more she spoke, the clearer it became that there was no mistake at all. By getting married again, I had automatically lost the right to the full benefit that had supported my life for years. I walked out of that place unable to think clearly. The world didn't make a sound, no one noticed anything, but inside me, something had completely collapsed. It wasn't just the money. It was the feeling of having made a decision without truly understanding what was at stake, and realizing too late that some choices don't allow for correction. After that day, I spent weeks trying to understand exactly where I had gone wrong. It wasn't just about numbers or rules. It was about something no one had ever clearly explained to me. Because when you reach a certain age, people talk a lot about companionship, about not growing old alone. But almost no one talks about the real cost of those decisions. I grew up believing in a very simple idea, that sharing your life with someone would always be safer than facing everything alone. That, in the end, having someone by your side meant protection, stability, even dignity. And it was exactly that belief that made me lower my guard at the most important moment. The truth is, there's a silent lie that follows many people for years. The idea that any form of love justifies any kind of sacrifice. And no, that's not true. Because when you don't understand what you're giving up, you're not really choosing. You're simply giving in without realizing it. If there's one sentence I wish I had heard before, it's this: not every kind of companionship protects you. Some only replace one void with another, much more costly one. And the worst part isn't losing something, it's only realizing its value after you can no longer get it back. I didn't lose my retirement the day I signed a paper. I lost it the moment I stopped questioning what seemed too obvious to be dangerous. And that's exactly how the most expensive decisions in our lives happen. In silence, without warning, disguised as something that seems too right to question. After everything happened, I began to revisit every small decision that led me to that point. And that's when I realized something I had never noticed before. Nothing happened all at once. It wasn't one big, impulsive choice. It was a series of small concessions, almost imperceptible, that I kept making without questioning, believing I was simply making life easier. At first, I ignored the doubts that came up in the beginning. I thought it was just my own insecurity, fear of starting over after so many years. So I convinced myself it was normal to give in a little, to trust more, not to complicate things. After all, at a certain age, you start to believe you need to take opportunities before it's too late. Then, I began to justify everything. Every discomfort became a phase of adjustment. Every warning sign became just in my head. I kept telling myself it was better than being alone, that it was worth giving up a few things in exchange for companionship. And without realizing it, I drifted away from decisions I would have never accepted before. Time kept passing, and each small choice seemed irrelevant on its own, but together, they built a path I didn't even realize I was following. A path where I was no longer protecting what was mine, but trying to preserve something that deep down I didn't fully understand. And this is the most dangerous cycle there is. You think you're just adjusting, then you believe you're doing the right thing, then you repeat it, and when you finally notice, time has already passed and the decision is already made. It's not the mistake that destroys everything at once. It's the silent repetition of it over time. A few months after all of this, I remembered a conversation I had years earlier with a friend named Mary Collins. She was 72 at the time and had always been an extremely organized woman, careful with everything, especially money. Mary wasn't impulsive, quite the opposite. She was the kind of person who thought through every detail before making any decision. But when her husband passed away, something changed. It wasn't sudden. It happened gradually, a silence that began to grow inside her home. And it was in that moment that a nephew, Daniel Collins, started getting closer. He seemed present, attentive, always willing to help with small everyday things, and to her, that meant far more than it appeared. Over time, Mary began to trust him in a way she never had before. First, she asked for help with simple bills. Then, she allowed him to handle banking matters to make her routine easier. Everything felt practical, comfortable, and above all, safe. After all, he was family, someone she believed she could trust without question. But trust, when it isn't accompanied by awareness, becomes a silent risk. Daniel began making decisions on her behalf without fully explaining them. Small amounts, temporary transfers, adjustments that seemed insignificant, until one day, Mary realized that much of what she had built was no longer under her control. When she told me this, what struck me most wasn't the financial loss. It was the way she said, "I didn't lose everything at once. I was giving it away, little by little, thinking I was making my life easier. And in that moment, without knowing it, she was describing the exact same path I would follow years later. After I started to recognize this pattern, another story came back to my memory with a clarity I didn't have before. A man named Robert Miller, a neighbor from an old neighborhood where I lived for many years. Robert was always seen as someone responsible, hardworking, the kind of person everyone respects and trusts without a second thought. When his daughter, Emily Miller, began facing financial difficulties, he didn't hesitate to help. At first, it was small amounts, occasional support to handle emergencies. He said it was temporary, that things would soon settle. And like any father, he believed he was simply doing what was right. Over time, the help kept increasing. Emily became more dependent, and Robert started reorganizing his own life to sustain the situation. He gave up plans, compromised his savings, and even postponed important decisions, always believing it was just a phase. He didn't see it as a loss. He saw it as care. But the problem was never helping. The problem was not realizing when help stopped being support and became full dependence. By the time he tried to step back, it was too late. His finances were strained, and the relationship no longer had the balance it once did. He didn't just lose money, he lost the freedom to choose. And when I look at Robert's story, I see the same pattern once again. It doesn't matter if it's for love, family, or fear of being alone. The risk begins the moment you stop measuring what you're giving away. Because loss rarely happens all at once. It's built through small decisions that seem too right to question. After everything that happened, there wasn't a single moment when I said, "Now I understand." It wasn't a dramatic turning point, nor an impulsive decision. It was something slower, almost uncomfortable. I began to realize that, for a long time, I had confused love with total surrender and companionship with security. And that changed the way I started to see every choice I made. At first, it was hard to accept that the responsibility was also mine, not because of the mistake itself, but because I hadn't questioned things enough while there was still time. I had always been independent, always taken care of my own life. But in that moment, I realized that independence isn't just about doing everything alone. It's about knowing how to protect what's yours, even when someone close to you asks for space within it. I started changing small things in my daily life. I began paying more attention to what I agreed to automatically, to what I avoided confronting just to prevent discomfort. And most importantly, I stopped making important decisions based on the fear of losing someone. Because in the end, that was exactly what caused me to lose much more. That change didn't bring back what I had lost, but it gave me something I had never valued enough: clarity. Clarity to understand that not every closeness is healthy, that not every kind of help is necessary, and that not every decision needs to be made to please or keep someone around. And maybe that was the biggest transformation, to stop living trying to preserve relationships at any cost, and start living by protecting my own life. Because when you truly understand that, you realize that the real risk was never being alone. It was abandoning your own protection just to avoid feeling that way. Now I want to ask you a question I avoided for a long time. Are you truly satisfied with the way you're living today? not with what you show others, but with what you feel when you're in silence. Because it was in that silence that I began to realize that many of my choices weren't really mine. And tell me honestly, what have you been postponing out of fear of losing someone or being alone? How many decisions have you made trying to maintain a relationship, avoid a conflict, or simply not face a truth you've felt for a long time? Because that's exactly how I kept giving things up, little by little, without realizing how much it was costing me. Now think about this. What do you know truly matters, but keep ignoring? That conversation you avoid, that boundary you never set, that decision you delay thinking it will be easier later. I thought the same way. I believed I had time, that I could fix things afterward. But the truth is, time doesn't correct the decisions you avoid facing. It only accumulates their consequences. And if you don't stop now to look clearly at your own life, there's a very real chance you'll only understand it when there's nothing left to recover. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't start by changing everything at once. I would begin with something very simple. I would have tried to understand before deciding. Not just trust, not just feel like it was right, but actually ask questions, investigate, look closely at the details that seem too small to matter. Because those were exactly the details that ended up costing everything later. I also would have protected my autonomy more firmly. No matter how close someone gets or how safe a relationship may seem, there are things that cannot be given away without full awareness. Financial decisions, rights, choices that affect your future. That is not a lack of love. That is responsibility for your own life. Another thing I would have done differently is not to confuse presence with security. Just because someone is by your side does not mean they are protecting you. It took me a long time to understand that. Sometimes companionship only masks the risk because it makes you lower your guard at the exact moment you need to be most aware. And above all, I would have learned not to make important decisions based on fear. Fear of being alone, fear of losing someone, fear of starting over. Because every time you decide from fear, you open the door to choices you would never make if you were at peace with yourself. And those are almost always the decisions that cost the most in the end. Today, at 88 years old, I understand with a clarity I wish I had much earlier. The problem was never starting over. It was not understanding what I was leaving behind when I did. Because some choices don't just take away what comes next. They erase what you spent a lifetime building, quietly, without warning. If there's one thing I can tell you now, it's this. Don't confuse companionship with security. And never make important decisions without fully understanding what's at stake. Because in the end, it wasn't the marriage that marked me the most. It was realizing how long I had already been giving up on myself. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it while there's still time. And subscribe to the channel, because some truths only come when we're willing to see them.